Hey y'all, Zelda here. Um, this video is going to be about my reading goals and my 2024 year in review. I'm going to be looking at my StoryGraph details from last year. So if that is appealing to you, stick around. I'm also going to give my five favorite books of four different categories of what I read last year. And yeah. I'm excited to share a little bit about myself as a reader. As you may have been aware or not, I have not really been posting very publicly for about the past 2 years. I really have started to evaluate. I went through this big reevaluation kind of metamorphosis process of how do I feel about how my presence on social media has affected my creative life, my pastimes, my downtime, my inner and outer world, and realized that I was putting a lot of energy and just wasn't enjoying my creative process quite as much. Everything had felt like it became kind of a demand. And one of the things that I really started refocusing on about 2 years ago is that I started creating book goals for myself of how much I wanted to read each year. Now, for me, before I share my book goal, I am someone who has always loved reading. I started reading when I was very young. I like earlier than average. I am hyperlexic, so I read really fast. I went to school to be a therapist. So through a master's level degree, wrote very long papers, research papers. So I also have not only natural aptitude for it. It's something that I loved, that I enjoyed before going to school, even and outside of school, as well as an affinity for it. I enjoy it, I love it, and I have training around doing it. Like I can read large quantities of information, perhaps faster than the average bear. So. Yes, that is a little bit about me. My book goal for this year is the same as my book goal for last year. My book goal for last year was, um, hold on, I'm just gonna pull it up. My last year one, um, was 170, I think, for last year, and it is for this year as well. Um, I was able to meet it. I went a little bit above it last year. I think I had 174 total. Yeah, 174 books total. Um, it is when you go through StoryGraph, I'm just gonna show you. It shows you all these graphs and everything, the last ones that you read. And these are the main categories that you read in. And mine for last year were romance, fantasy, LGBTQIA plus, which is funny that that's a genre, I guess, but I am queer and I love reading books by queer authors about queer theory, and the psychology books. I tend to favor that kind of overlap, I guess, of identity. Manga, I do love reading manga and graphic novels and contemporary fiction. This year, one of my goals was to increase the amount, the percentage of nonfiction to fiction. Um, I think that it maybe, I'm not sure if it shows you that aspect, but it does show you this. And then so I can show you um, the average rating, which was, I guess, 3.53 stars. I will say that I tend to have three be a baseline star rating. Three is not offensive, but it was fine. It wasn't super profoundly memorable. But it a four is I really liked it. A 4.25 tends to be I really liked it, but it wasn't perfect. A five is I'm recommending this book before I even finish it. I'm obsessed with it. Um, these were my five-star reads. Some of them are on this list, and funnily, a couple of them weren't. So April, which is my birthday, I'm usually in a pretty good mood, and April was the month that I rated things the highest. I feel like for me, this suggests that I am highly subjective with my ratings. If you somehow find my story graph, which I don't really have people follow because it's really just the way that I keep track of things, that's not really it's not something that I'm trying to show off around, which is why I did never share it. But if you find it, you'll see that that probably my ratings really vary and they're very subjective. And maybe if I'm in a better place, I rate things a lot higher. I don't know. I think that's really funny of those different subjective ratings. Anyway, so let me tell you my favorites. Um, I am also sharing that I am also trying to read 170 books this year. I didn't find it incredibly difficult last year. I will say that, like, I think it sounds to many people like a much higher book goal. Please do consider that I read like graphic novels and memoirs. I listen to audiobooks. I read books of essays. I read novellas sometimes. I read, you know, things that are not always the heftiest tomes, and I kind of like intersperse it with other things that I really enjoy. And this year I'm trying to read more nonfiction, but I also am like being pretty gentle with that goal. This is meant to be fun. If you set a reading goal, I hope it's to be fun and to like make yourself get to like have more structure and commit to things that you love rather than like, self-flagellation or something, or like shaming yourself into reading more, because that's not, it should be enjoyable. At least I think that reading should. It's something that I find so nourishing. Um, so yeah, so here are some of my favorite books from 2024. Um, First is the nonfiction category. Number one, these are not in order of how much I loved them, by the way. They're all just books that I feel like, without a doubt, I think people would love these if they read them. Um, and I'll kind of tell you who I think they would be best for. So, number one is Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. Um, Gabor Mate is an incredible writer and educator. The work that I was familiar with before reading this was in the realm of Hungry Ghost. Mate writes a lot about like addiction and psychology, and his work is really pivotal in that. I also think that this book is very timely. It speaks to like this late stage capitalism experience that we're having, and really like examines like the context, like a systems theory exploration of how that affects our health, and really kind of challenges some of the like hyper individualized perspectives that Western science has on medicine. I really recommend it. It is like a little bit chonky, but it is chock full of such amazing information. And I personally read it really fast. I thought that it was really conversational. I love that about Gabor Mate's writing, is that it's really informative and like dense with like information, but it's told in a very like storytelling kind of manner. So it's not like dense theory. Number two, these are still nonfiction, was Daughters of Copper Woman. I actually pulled that one out right here. This is Daughters of Copper Woman. My partner and I actually got this book at a little local bookstore when we were traveling in British Columbia. This is a retelling of Northwest Coast Native creation myths. Um, the back here says Anne Cameron has woven together the lives of legendary and historical characters to create a sublime image of the social and spiritual power of women. This was the first edition, appeared in 1981. They refer to it as an underground classic. I guess this is a new edition, a republished edition, but honestly, I'm putting this in the nonfiction because it's not fiction, it's orature and it's myth, and that is not, I think, it doesn't belong in the like fictional category, especially when it's talking about the history of First Nation, of Indigenous peoples. So this book was so impactful for me for my own spiritual process, not to like adopt those traits since that's not my culture, but I think that sometimes one thing I love about books is that something in me like resonates of like, yeah, that's true. That feels so like true and applicable. And that is something that I really felt with this text, and I really, really loved it. Okay. Three of the nonfiction is Sociopath, a memoir by Patrice Gagny. I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce her name. But yeah, this was a memoir, pretty classic memoir biography in my experience of them, in terms of like, it's kind of written like each chapter is like a little bit like an essay, but it also has like a narrative through line. It's obviously about her life, but the topic at hand is the fact that she is self-diagnosed and clinically diagnosed with kind of like sociopathic tendencies and does an exploration of like how this is marginalized. I think this is very like a hot topic actually right now in terms of like cluster B, um, like creating these cluster B like abuse labels and how there's a lot of marginalization within neurodiversity, like within neurodivergence around this specific type. And there's a lot of villainizing of people who have these pathways. And she talks a lot about like as someone with those qualities, what industries, like the music industry, what industries kind of endorse those like almost like narcissistic tendencies, those like not social tendencies actually. They're like about kind of taking advantage of each other, not having as much of a moral compass. These are all really interesting because I think these are easy words to just like slap on something like a label to kind of dismiss something when really they are areas where our attention can find a lot of nuance and a lot of new ways of thinking about these things. And yeah, I love mental health. I love these new perspectives. I love reading as someone who is a lived experience mental health provider, meaning that I experienced trauma. I am neurodivergent. I am someone who works with other people who are like me. Not as like an expert who is an authority on other people, like a normative person coming in to like fix people kind of. And that value is super important to me in healing work. And so I love reading about other therapists who are neurodivergent in a different way than I experience it, but in an equally valuable way to contribute to the field. So I loved it. I thought it was very accessible, very readable. I recommended it to my mom right away because we had just had like a debate or an argument. I don't like using labels for things that they don't apply to. And yeah, it was great. It's great to have a resource too to recommend to people. So highly recommend, especially if you're interested in psychology, if you're interested in like sociopathic tendencies, if that's something that you like are either suspect for yourself or a loved one or are curious about and characters and things like that. I think this really like fleshed out a lot of more like humanized perspective of what it might be like to live with something like that, with an experience like that. So number four, oh, this was one of my favorite books of 2024. I mean, I know all these are, but like, oh, each one I'm telling you about, I'm like, you're gonna love it. This was How to Tell When We Will Die by Johanna Hedva. And it's so good. It's so good. It's a book of essays. I think the like How to Tell When We Will Die, colon, on pain, disability, and doom. It is just Johanna talks in one of the essays about like the book's creation and how they had like a offer kind of to like sell the book before it was actually written and why they like waited and didn't and kind of let it grow on its own and how important that was. And I just felt like that really showed. It is comprehensive, it's vast in the different topics. I laughed, I cried, I was inspired, I started writing my own essays. I just loved it. I thought it was incredible. I thought it was an incredible exploration of many different points of contact, living with chronic pain, living with disability, living with the current state of the world and how that impacts people's ability to live with these different chronic conditions. As someone myself who experiences pain and disability, that it is very difficult and also very fulfilling and very meaningful and to still be alive and like to live in the way that we do. So yeah, I loved it. I don't usually love things like wrestling, but I loved listening to Johanna Hedva talk about it and their essays. I loved the addressing of the like neurodivergence and pain and the kink community. Um, that is an amazing art like essay in there. There's just so many good ones. And I listened to it as an audiobook, which I actually highly recommend. I don't always love essays as audiobooks, but this was so nice. It allowed me to kind of pace myself. It felt very immersive and conversational in that way. And yeah, I feel like it was one of those like transformative processes to read it. Like went through so many different domains and I just like Johanna Hedfeld will follow you and like lead you through it elegantly and beautifully. So highly recommend. Um, Okay. Who would I recommend? I would recommend for anyone who tends to like essays, anyone who lives or has someone who is beloved to them who lives with chronic pain. If you are radically minded, I think you'll love it. If you like lit theory or feminist critiques, I think you would love it. If you're thinking about late stage capitalism and our, collapsing medical system, I think I think it's good. If you like pro wrestling, yeah, that's in there too. So, I think there's a lot for you. I think a lot of people would like. I think everyone could read it. I would definitely use it on a syllabus if I was teaching certain classes. So like I stored it away in my mind in that way. Okay, number 5. This is a classic, Teaching Critical Thinking by Bell Hooks. I just I feel like anyone who is feeling like I read it in this time, I had it on my shelf. It has a pink spine, so it's a book that I like. I have my books color coded, and so I remember the spine. But I read this at a time where I was feeling really discouraged about the state of the world. Like, there's so many discouraging things, and maybe you're that way right now. Right now, I'm like trying to maintain my vigor and engagement with what I can do rather than feeling despair. But in the time that I read it, it was right after the election, and I was just feeling like how they're dismantling our education system. How, like, people on the internet, they are not engaging with things critically. It feels like they're not engaging and putting thought and energy in their, which like, I'm not blaming anyone. And if this is something that you've experienced, like, I do that too on the internet. Like, we on the internet, it is easy to not be critical and engage critically and put in effort to think about things. And so I turned to the venerable bell hooks to help with learning again about the teaching praxis of critical thinking. And honestly, it's inspiring. It's humbling. It frames us in a historical context, and there's many pedagogical tips that I think would be really useful. If you are currently teaching in this world, it is a great resource to revisit. If you're going to facilitate a workshop, if you're working with different, like, if you're a provider, like a healthcare provider trying to support, or if you're like trying to like communicate across difference, which I think a lot of us are at this time. I just think it's a really great resource. It's small. It's like if you're behind on your book goal, it's actually not that hefty, and it's a really great um like teaching resource basically. Bell Hooks is also just, I'm sure you know, just an incredible writer. So, classic. Okay, the next 5. So those are my 5 favorite nonfiction. The next 5 are my favorite poetry books. 2 of them I'm going to named together because they're both by the same poet, and I was like went back and forth like, oh, should I really put 2 by the same, but like I'm going to because I love them. They're both by C.A. Conrad, who I adore, and have had the blessed experience of getting to see them read and be in their workshops at the summer writing program in Europa. So I love C.A. Conrad. I love all of their books, and I especially love the 2 that I got um, from Wave Books. So, the first one is Listen to the Golden Boomerang Return. This one I put down first. So I think I liked this one better, but it's hard to tell. I love them both so much. I will reread them. I adored them. And the other one is Amanda Paradise. They're both exquisite. I also, if you haven't read, these are just the ones that I read last year. I was so excited that they're ones that I haven't read yet when I was ordering from this press. I was just really excited. And I had such a good time. My partner read them. We were writing poetry all the time. C.A. Conrad just has this like effusive, muse-like, inspirational quality. And they are radiant and gifted at being a poet and inspiring poetry in others, including myself. So thank you, C.A. Conrad, and go read their poems. Um, and maybe write some poems after you read them. So that's number 1 and 2. The third poetry book that I read last year, I actually reread this last year, and I do count that as reading. I don't discern my rereads from my reads, and I'm going to do a whole video on how much I adore rereading and why I think it's such an intimate practice. But all that to say, yes, I reread this book. I loved it. Again, it was one of my top five books. And of course it was because I chose to revisit it. Bone by Ursa Daly Ward. It is impactful. It's good for people who are healing from trauma. I would look at, for all the poetry, I would look at the content and the description before deciding if it is going to be appropriate for you to read. Poetry is obviously kind of like music. It's incredibly evocative. And this is no different. But I adored this one. I adored the reread and I adored it the first, I think, twice that I read it. The fourth book of poetry that I read in 2024 that I loved is Let the World Have You by Miko Harvey. I don't have a ton to share about these poetry books. They are so immersive, and honestly, I read them a little while ago now. I'm excited to talk more about like my favorite quotes and stuff when I've read them like more and more recent. But I really, when I was going through, I even saw it on the bookshelf and was like, I can't wait to read that again. I'm gonna give it another month or so because I read it like not that long ago, a couple months ago. Um, and yeah, this was just really beautiful. Let the world have you. It felt immersive. It felt like not like Mary Oliver-esque, but it was like devotional and dealt with current topics. I feel like go check it out. Maybe you'll like it. The last one that I put this one in poetry, even though arguably it is maybe a hybrid work. It does have an incredible essay at the beginning, but whatever. I'm putting it here. So, Dream I Tell You by Alonso Sue. I love this intro. I've read the intro before, but I hadn't read all of the dream sequences. So it's like this intro by Alonso Sue, and like part of what she says is this kind of exploration of this like project of Dream Journal and how she also talks about this like dreaming, this kind of like autonomy of the dreaming self and this like is the dream the real self or the waking self? And it's just very like it shifts the way that you think about it, and it has something about that liminal dreamlike quality where like the subconscious and the collective unconscious and all of these like images overlapping. And Alonso Sue is just an incredibly brilliant writer, so I think any insight into her process is really kind of cool. um yeah, and then the dream sequences were pretty cool. So if you're like starting a dream journal, if you're like writing a paper about dreams, if you're thinking about dreams in like a psychological poetry writing context, Alonso Sue is incredible and this book is really fun. I also don't see a lot of people talk about this book, even though like I feel like if you're gonna like start a dream journal and doing this process, this is a really fun one to like get the juices flowing. If you're interested in like delving into your own dream realm, so to speak. Um, Okay, so those are my five favorite poetry books. Next are my five favorite fiction. I had a hard time deciding whether this should go in just fiction or in romance, but because it's like not the romance arc, I would say, like romance has a discernible pattern to it to me. Um, because of that, I decided to put this in fiction, and this was The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. And this is like I also loved the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea, which is um I can't remember the name of right now, but it was great. Somewhere Beyond the Sea, I think is what it's called. But I really love TJ Klune. I'm excited to read more of their work. I loved their afterword to their second book of wanting to be known as the um like anti J.K. Rowling, which honestly is such a vibe and like you're nailing it. That's my feedback for TJ Klune. I think that you are known that way. I think that you give people a huge amount of hope. And I just am here for books that have like radical visions for how we have community and love each other while moving forward in this challenging world. And I think that there was a lot of attending to trauma. And it's just really beautiful. It's a really beautiful book and it's really magical. So there's all these like magical beings in like a foster home type of situation and this social worker essentially goes into evaluate and it like is a romance and family like love story kind of that happens and everyone gets to grow and change and yeah, it's delightful. It's Beautiful. I loved it. I listened to it as an audiobook too and highly recommend. I thought the narrator was great. I get all my audiobooks on Libro FM, by the way, because F Amazon. Okay, so the second one is Weavers of Alamaxa by Hadir El-Spy. I also listened to this as an audiobook and also loved it. My partner had one, it's narrated by two different narrators because there's like two main characters. Um, and my partner liked one but not the other, but I actually loved both of them. So you could give it a listen. They always have samples that you can listen to see if you like it, but this is another great one for audiobook. Um, I loved this. This was such a magical, like the magic system was super fun and exciting. I loved the content and the setting. It is like a like kind of like a Middle Eastern setting, and there's like a religious um they're fighting for their voting rights, right? There are women fighting for their voting rights, and it's like a magical system. And there's also like this political tension between people who are weavers, who have this like elemental power, and people who are not. Um, it's just really beautiful. The it's a duology, which I love that with like all the romantasy and the fantasy that just like goes on and on and on, and it gets more famous, and they make more subplots and whatever. I just feel like there's something very artful and beautiful about like a good duology. It's wrapped up. It's like really good storytelling. And I just really loved it. I loved it. I loved there's some sapphic romance in it. Big fan of that. I'm always looking for that. So most of these you'll notice do like even in the fiction have some romantic aspect, some relational arc. I tend to favor that. I just like that in books. So that's something that I care about. So if you don't care about that, we might have different book tastes, and that's okay. Um, so the next one on this list is In Ascension by Martin McInnes, I think is how you pronounce his last name. So this is not one of my five-star reads, but wow, was this book so bizarrely impactful for how I was thinking and how I was writing at the time. It was very surreal. It has this like deep into the under the sea and out into space type of energy. Like there's just this like idea of like humans development process and like differentiation and all these themes of failed migrations. And I was just, it was like, felt very epic or something. I tend to think of like going to space as just feeling kind of like this weird, like human impulse that also is somehow fruitless. And I just, yeah, it was really human. It was like grounded. There was a lot of personal narrative, not of the author, but of the main character. And there was a lot of diversity. I will say that I looked at some of the books when I read books that are impactful like this, and I'm like, well, it wasn't perfect. There were obviously things that maybe I would change. But then I see the comments and they're like, it was really boring. I'm like, it wasn't boring. Like so this one I think went on the list because of that. It wasn't boring. I thought it was very profound. I will say this is a bit of like a headier literary book. It's like conceptual. There's a lot of like dense imagery unfolding. It's very scenic, very like um psychological and like theoretical in a way, like examine like existential, I guess is the word that I'm looking for. So yeah, if you're into that kind of thing, like I think you'd love it. And it was when I got it like a used bookstore, I really, really liked it. So yeah, In Ascension. The next one on the list, number four of the fiction category, is Beautyland. I'm just gonna Google click um, or look on my phone of the Beautyland and who wrote it. It was written by Marie Helen Bertino. Um, that's what the cover looks like. Um, this one was really memorable. I listened to it as an audiobook. It's about like an alien, not a person, like someone who believes that they're an alien, like faxing instructions back to the mothership, basically. And like they're a writer and they're like writing about the human experience. And there's just this like really beautiful, like cinematic quality to it. And this like figuring out what it means to be a human from like an outsider perspective. And it was like poetic and funny and uh like surprising in a way. And I really liked it. I didn't wasn't left at the end like I know exactly what happened or I have a ton of feelings, but I was like, that was a great experience. So, yeah, it was really memorable. I really enjoyed it. I listened to it as an audiobook and did really love the audiobook. I was cat sitting my neighbor's cats for the first time, and I remember listening to the audiobook and like bonding with this cute new cat. So that's a really fun memory of mine. So if you have cat sitting, maybe you'll enjoy that experience. I don't know. Okay. Number five, this is gonna be a very long video. So number five of the fiction category is, and technically this is a novella, is Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo. And like my partner and I both rated this 5 stars. I loved this. It is mythological feeling. It's like this storytelling, kind of like The Princess Bride, where there's like someone telling a story, and that's kind of like how it unfolds is like in that context. That's what this kind of novella is about. There are two more novellas to the series, but honestly, I read this one and then I kind of paused and I haven't gotten back to the next ones yet. But I loved it. It was so beautiful. If you have like a day where you can sit down and just like fall into this magical world, I highly recommend it. Easy to get into, pretty quick, very fun, very magical, very moving. Um, yeah, Empress of Salt and Fortune by Nevo. It also does go on sale, I think, on Libro FM a lot. So if you want to try it as an audiobook, but I didn't read it as an audiobook, and it has these really cute, like matching little novellas for my shelf. So we got that version instead. Okay, so that's the fiction roundup. The last section is romance slash romantasy. I combine these genres. They do have, I guess, if I'm thinking of pattern, like romance has a specific arc and romantasy kind of has its own specific like tropes to it. But I'm categorizing them together because I think that that would be like what people would be most likely to categorize and actually enjoy them. So the first one, this actually was my favorite. It was incredible. I love it. I recommended it to my little sister who went and visited Spain, and she read it, and all of the friends she was with on the trip read it, and they all loved it. So this one has been vetted and is incredible. It's called Palace of Eros. I adored this book. Um, I'm gonna do the same thing. Palace of Eros. So that I make sure to tell you the author by Carolina de Robertis. It was so beautiful. I read it. I got it from the library, which I love. I love the library. You should go to your library. But this is one book where I'm like, I can't believe I didn't buy it. I need a copy. I will buy a copy next time I find a good one at a used bookstore. Um, or a signed copy in a bookstore, in a small bookstore. I loved it. It is hard to describe well, I mean, it's not hard to describe. It is a retelling in some ways of Eros and Psyche. So it is one of those like Greek mythology rooted retellings, but it is genderqueer. It is challenging gender norms and identity expectations. It is emotionally developing. It is relational. It follows the classic pathway, but it is just really beautiful. I loved it. I thought it was poetic. I thought it was moving. It moved you through the story too, so it didn't like get too dense or too heavy or too kind of boring when you're like, I kind of know how the arc of the story goes, at least if you know much about Greek mythology. Like I like Greek mythology, but and mythology in general. Anyway, I feel like you cannot go wrong with this. It's so great. It's very mystical. It's feels perfect. I loved this book. So yeah, that was my favorite romance of the year for sure. Two is actually one that I'm rereading. I'm re-listening to it right now because the new one came out, which is Fourth Wing. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This one I don't think anyone needs recommended to them, frankly, at this point. It is so famous. They came out with like a second audiobook that was like a dramatized retelling. I'm sure it's getting made into a movie already, whatever. Everyone's heard of it, everyone loves it, but I am me too. I also love it and I put it on my list. So I'm re-listening to it. This is my first re-listen, so it's not something that I've listened to a bunch of times. The narrator's pretty good. I'm excited to listen to Onyx and Storm, which is the third one that just came out. And I like re-listening to audiobooks, even if they're kind of like romance or romantasy, because I just find them very comforting when I'm kind of between books or when I need to multitask with something that's kind of heady because I know the story already and I can kind of like miss a word or two and it's not that big of a deal. So yeah, I'm really re-listening to it right now. I paused it to start this video with you and I'm enjoying it again. So I definitely recommend Fourth Wing. It is a good substitute for folks who are looking for a replacement because they don't like a magical school trope. Usually I recommend the Scholomance trilogy, which I still recommend. I just didn't, it's not on this list because I didn't read it last year. But I love that trilogy for like replacing the Magical School of J.K. Rowling because I don't know with that anymore. Anyway, the other tropes that I like, this is another book of that kind of trope. It's a little bit less like developing and growing up like the Scholomance in the same way, but it does have this like arc of development of like being at the school and then kind of like moving away from that, kind of how they typically go in that genre. But it's exciting, it's fun, it's spicy, I like it. And I'm excited to read the third one. It also has a really cute fandom to it, so welcome. Um, okay, number three is another book that I reread. A lot of these are rereads, I guess. The video's coming on why that is the case. I do read tons of new books, but sometimes my favorites don't change. Um, this one is like if you like spicy romance that leans towards like the dark kind and you want to explore like a non-shade like 50 Shades of Grey type version of BDSM or things that cover kink. This book I found originally because the author wrote it on a website like online where people just like post stuff kind of like Wattpad. I found it online first and read it in installments and then eventually she was like, "Oh, if you want to read the ending to it, you could buy this book." And I was like, I'm in. I love it. Give it to me. And so I bought it and I love it. It's called Ashes of Sin and Stardust. It didn't used to be called that. It used to be called How to Tame a Brat. So that gives you a little bit of insight into the context. The Ashes of Sin and Stardust, like, okay, that's fine. They followed the this of this and this, like romantasy trope. It's not romantasy. It's definitely like psychological like romance that is in the BDSM power control framework. Both characters have a significant trauma backstory, but it's really about like healing in relationship. It's romantic, it's beautiful. It's obviously fiction, so it's not intended to be real or a handbook to like learn this lifestyle. But if you like that kind of thing, I love it and I never see anyone talk about it. And Lindsay Murray is great. She's the author. I highly recommend it. Okay. Four on this list is The Witch's Heart by Genevieve Gornichek. And this was really beautiful. This is about like Loki and like a kind of wife or mistress or spouse of Loki who is the witch of the witch's heart. And it had like I love these mythic retellings, kind of like The Bear and the Nightingale. If you really like that, I think you would like this by Catherine Arden. This was just, and it's even done in like the same style. It has that kind of like mythic retelling, like Circe, things like that. And it's just different. It's different than those. It's got a really great personal arc of story. It's mysterious. It lets you like learn the world and the mythology, and you don't have to know. Like if you don't know anything about Loki, then like I think you'd still really like it. And if you do know a lot about it, I think it wouldn't like spoil it. It's a little bit less like, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen because of this, because I know the myth before. But yeah, I thought it was really beautiful. It is romantic and it has like a sneaky, it's not the normal romance arc, but it is still really romantic. And I think it still falls in this category. I loved it. I thought it was beautiful. Um, and kind of like some of the other mythic retellings, it made me want to write. It made me want to tell stories. It made me want to listen to stories. So yeah, I think you'd like it if you like kind of those mythological retellings. And then the last one of the romance genre, and then we're gonna wrap up because it was like much longer than I was planning today. But the fifth and final of this list is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. I listened to this as an audiobook. It is so sweet. It is, I would say, more classic romance. I am really good at identifying the patterns and tropes of romance really early. So I like within like 10 minutes was like, I kind of know that this is
is like an enemy to lovers type of romance. So that won't really ruin much for you. It is a enemy to lovers. So if you like that trope, it is very sweet. It is also mythological in nature. It has that very like epic quality to it of like encountering people in many lifetimes almost like those like romance dramas, but it's not super dense. It's light. It's sweet. It has a great ending. I think it also had some unexpected sweetness in different moments, and it was really vivid. And I really liked the narrator. The narrator had like a subtle, almost like lisp, and I thought it was really sweet. But if that kind of thing is like those unique narrators, if that distracts at all from the like quality of the book, you might listen to this narrator. Her voice is very soft and I could see people who maybe don't like ASMR almost like that might be harsh on their ears, but for me, it wasn't too intense in that. It's certainly not like ASMR. It's just like, that quality of it. Um, but yeah, it was really beautiful. It was romantic. I loved it. I loved the ending. And I loved the experience. It was quick to move through. I think I listened to it in like a day or two. So okay, those are my top, I guess, 20 books of 2024. And I am going to wrap this up and post it for you. So this also gives you a little flavor of like the kinds of books you can expect me to be giving in my roundup. And I might try to post like my monthly reviews or my monthly faves. But I'm not overcommitting to it. I'm just excited to make more videos about reading and books that I love and even about my own writing process someday if I feel like doing that. So it's so nice to see y'all. Let me know what your favorite books of either 2024 feels like forever ago, honestly, especially with this current situation in the US government. So if you have any books that you currently think I would love based on my recommendations, let me know. If you have favorite books from your last year that were in common, I'd love to hear it too. I'm really excited to connect with more people about reading and fantasy and writing and all those magical things. So, sending you lots of love. Look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.